Dr. Helen Martinez walked into the Grand Council chamber with her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. The room was filled with the most powerful people in the solar system, representatives from Earth, Mars, and the asteroid mining stations, sat in rows of polished metal chairs. Above them, a massive screen showed the current time across all human colonies. It was 2157, and humanity had spread far beyond Earth. But today Helen wanted to take them even further. The council chamber fell silent as Helen approached the speaking platform. She had practiced this presentation 100 times, but her heart still raced. What she was about to propose would change everything. She looked up at the faces staring down at her. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few appeared downright hostile. "Distinguished council members," Helen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "For the past century, we have built our colonies on solid ground. Mars gave us red dirt and ice. The asteroids gave us metals and minerals. But today I want to talk about building a city in the sky." She pressed a button on her tablet, and the massive screen behind her lit up with an image of Venus. The planet glowed like a pearl, its thick clouds swirling in endless patterns. Most people saw Venus as a hellish world where the surface temperature could melt lead and the air was made of acid. But Helen saw something different. She saw opportunity. "Venus," she continued, "has been called Earth's evil twin. The surface is hot enough to kill a human in seconds. The atmosphere is filled with sulfuric acid that would dissolve our spacecraft. But 50 kilometers above that deadly surface, something amazing happens. The temperature drops to a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius. The pressure becomes almost exactly like Earth's atmosphere, and there are resources there that we can barely imagine." Councilman Peter Brooks stood up from his seat. He was a large man with gray hair and a permanent frown. He had opposed every major expansion project for the past decade. "Dr. Martinez," he said in a voice that echoed through the chamber, "you want us to build a city in the clouds of the most dangerous planet in our solar system. Have you lost your mind?" Helen had expected this reaction. Peter Brooks controlled the budget for colonial expansion, and he had never approved of what he called risky adventures. He preferred to spend money on expanding the Mars colonies, which were safe and profitable. "Councilman Brooks," Helen replied calmly, "I understand your concerns, but let me show you what we could accomplish." She pressed another button, and the screen showed a detailed diagram of her proposed floating city. It looked like a collection of balloons connected by bridges, floating high above Venus's surface. The atmosphere of Venus is so thick that a balloon filled with normal air would float just like a helium balloon on Earth. We could build entire cities that stay aloft naturally. And the resources available are incredible. Carbon dioxide for our plants, sulfur compounds for manufacturing, and enough solar energy to power 100 Earth cities. Admiral Lisa Carter leaned forward in her seat. She was the head of the Solar Defense Force, and her opinion carried enormous weight. "Dr. Martinez, your proposal is certainly ambitious. But what about the practical challenges? How do we get people there safely? How do we protect them from the acid clouds?" Helen smiled. This was the question she had been hoping for. "Admiral Carter, we have already solved most of these problems. My team has developed new materials that can resist the acidic atmosphere. We have designed spacecraft that can deliver supplies safely. And we have created atmospheric processors that can turn Venus's hostile environment into breathable air and drinkable water." She showed them video footage from her laboratory. Test. Balloons floated in chambers filled with simulated Venus atmosphere. Robotic arms demonstrated how the new materials could withstand acid that would destroy normal metals in minutes. Small atmospheric processors hummed quietly as they converted poisonous gases into oxygen and water. "But why Venus?" asked Dr. Patricia Williams, the representative from the Mars colonies. "We have plenty of room for expansion on Mars. The risks are much lower." Helen had prepared for this question too. "Dr. Williams, Mars is wonderful, but it has limitations. The gravity is too weak for long-term human health. The atmosphere is too thin to provide adequate radiation protection. And the resources are Limited, Venus, on the other hand, has gravity almost identical to Earth's. The thick atmosphere provides natural protection from space radiation, and the chemical resources are virtually unlimited. She brought up a new display showing the solar system. More importantly, Venus is the perfect stepping stone for reaching the outer planets. A floating city on Venus could serve as a refueling station for missions to Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond. It would give us the ability to explore the entire solar system. The council members began to murmur among themselves. Some were clearly excited by the possibilities. Others remained skeptical. Peter Brooks stood up again, his face red with anger. This is exactly the kind of wasteful spending that has gotten us into trouble before, he declared. We should focus on proven technologies and safe expansions, not wild experiments that could get people killed. But Admiral Carter stood up as well. Councilman Brooks, with respect, every great human achievement has involved risk. When we first went to Mars, people said it was impossible. When we started mining asteroids, they said it was too dangerous. But we succeeded because we were willing to take calculated risks. She turned to address the entire council. Dr. Martinez has presented U.S. with a detailed plan backed by solid science. Yes, there are risks, but the potential rewards are enormous. A floating city on Venus could revolutionize human space exploration. It could provide resources for terraforming other worlds. And it would prove once again that humans can adapt to any environment. The debate continued for hours. Council members asked detailed questions about construction methods, safety protocols, and budget requirements. Helen answered each one with confidence, supported by years of research and testing. She showed them how the floating city would be built in stages, starting with a small research station and growing into a full colony. Finally, the council chairwoman, Director Nancy Walsh, called for a vote. All those in favor of approving the Venus Initiative project? Helen held her breath as the electronic voting system tallied the results. The display showed the count climbing slowly. When it stopped, the result was close but clear. The project had been approved by a margin of just 3 votes. The chamber erupted in applause and arguments. Supporters cheered while opponents shook their heads in dismay. Peter Brooks stormed out, muttering about reckless endangerment of human lives. But Helen barely noticed the chaos around her. She had done it. Humanity was going to build a city in the clouds of Venus. Director Walsh approached her as the crowd began to disperse. Dr. Martinez, congratulations, you have your approval. Now, you need to make it work. Helen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I understand, Director. We won't let you down. I hope not, Walsh replied. Because if this project fails, it could set back human space exploration by decades. But if it succeeds, it could open up the entire solar system to human colonization. As Helen left the council chamber, she was already thinking about the next steps. The first task would be selecting the right team leader for the advance mission. She needed someone with experience in dangerous environments, someone who could inspire confidence in their crew, and someone who understood that failure was not an option. She thought about Commander Jake Sullivan, who had led the successful mission to establish the first permanent base on Mars. He was known for his calm leadership under pressure, and his ability to make difficult decisions quickly. More importantly, he understood the importance of this mission for humanity's future. Helen made her decision. Tomorrow, she would call Commander Sullivan and offer him the chance to lead humanity's boldest adventure yet. Together they would build a city in the clouds and prove once again that humans could survive and thrive anywhere in the universe. Commander Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the New Horizons, watching Venus grow larger on the main screen. After 6 months of travel through the cold darkness of space, the planet looked almost welcoming. Its thick clouds swirled in patterns that reminded him of Earth's weather systems, but he knew that beneath that beautiful exterior lay one of the most hostile environments in the solar system. Status report, Dr. Foster. Jake called to his atmospheric specialist. Dr. Amy Foster was hunched over her instruments, her face lit by the glow of multiple screens showing chemical readings from Venus's atmosphere. "Commander, we have a problem," Amy said, her voice tight with concern. "The sulfuric acid concentrations are reading much higher than our Earth-based models predicted. We're seeing levels that are 30% above what our equipment was designed to handle." Jake felt his stomach drop. The entire mission depended on their ability to survive in Venus's atmosphere. If their equipment couldn't handle the acid levels, they would have to abort the mission before it even began. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Davis, the ship's structural engineer, looked up from his own console. "Commander, I'm also seeing unusual readings. The atmospheric density is fluctuating in ways we didn't expect. It's like the entire atmosphere is shifting and moving in patterns we never observed from Earth." Dr. Sam Turner, the team's biotechnician, joined the conversation. "The biological atmospheric processors are struggling too. The bacteria we modified to break down Venus's atmosphere are dying faster than they can reproduce. We need to find a solution quickly, or we won't have breathable air for more than a few days." Jake walked to the main viewing port and stared out at Venus. The planet filled most of the view now, its yellow and orange clouds spinning in hypnotic spirals. Somewhere in those clouds, 50 kilometers above the deadly surface, was the sweet spot where humans could build a city. But getting there alive was proving more difficult than anyone had imagined. "Options," Jake said simply. His crew had worked together for 3 years, and they all knew that when the commander asked for options, he wanted honest assessments, not false hope. Amy spoke first. "We could try to modify our atmospheric processors in flight. I have some ideas about adjusting the chemical filters, but it would require a complete system shutdown for at least 12 hours. We would be running on emergency oxygen during that time." Ryan shook his head. "That's too risky. If the modifications don't work, we'll be dead in space with no way to breathe. I think we should consider returning to Earth and redesigning the entire system." "No," Jake said firmly. "We've come too far to turn back now. Dr. Foster, what's your confidence level on the modifications?" Amy was quiet for a moment, running calculations in her head. 70%, maybe 75? "The theory is sound, but we've never tested it under these conditions." Jake made his decision. "Do it. But we're going to take precautions. Dr. Turner, I want you to prepare the emergency habitat module for immediate deployment. If something goes wrong with the atmospheric processors, we need a backup plan." The next 12 hours were the longest of Jake's career. The crew worked in shifts, with half the team monitoring the atmospheric processor modifications, while the other half prepared the emergency habitat module. The module was designed to be their temporary home in Venus's atmosphere, a small but complete living space that could support 25 people for up to 6 months. Amy worked tirelessly on the atmospheric processors, her hands moving quickly over the complex machinery. She had to rebuild the entire chemical filtration system while the ship continued its approach to Venus. One mistake could kill them all. "How are we doing, Dr. Foster?" Jake asked as they entered their final approach to Venus's upper atmosphere. "Better than expected," Amy replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "The new filters are handling the acid levels, and I've managed to boost the efficiency of the biological processors by 40%. We should have breathable air within the hour." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Outstanding work. Mr. Davis, are we ready to deploy the habitat module?" Ryan nodded. "All systems are green, Commander. The module is ready for deployment on your command." Jake looked at his crew. They had all volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. They were the best humanity had to offer, and they had just proven once again that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. "Deploy the habitat module," Jake commanded the New Horizons. Shuddered slightly as the massive habitat module separated from the ship. Jake watched on the external cameras as the module deployed its atmospheric balloons and began to float freely in Venus's upper atmosphere. For the first time in human history, a permanent human habitat was floating in the clouds of another planet. "Module deployment successful," Ryan reported. "All systems are operating normally. Cloud Base Alpha is now online. The crew cheered, but their celebration was short-lived. Warning alarms began blaring throughout the ship, and Jake saw flashing red lights on multiple control panels. "What's happening?" Jake demanded. Dr. Turner was frantically working at his station. "Solar flare, Commander, a massive one. It's disrupting all our communication systems. We've lost contact with Earth, and our navigation systems are going crazy." Jake felt his heart sink. Without communication with Earth, they were completely on their own. If something went wrong now, no one would even know what happened to them. "Can we fix it?" Jake asked. Ryan was already pulling up diagnostic screens. "The main communication array is fried. Someone needs to go outside and replace the primary transmitter." "But Commander, we're 50 kilometers above Venus's surface. If something goes wrong during the spacewalk, there's no ground to land on. It's just clouds all the way down to hell." Jake looked at his crew. They were all experienced, but this was beyond anything they had trained for. A spacewalk in Venus's atmosphere was dangerous under the best circumstances. During a solar flare, it was almost suicidal. "I'll do it," Ryan said quietly. "I designed the communication system. I know exactly what needs to be replaced." "Ryan, no," Amy protested. "It's too dangerous." "We can try to contact Earth using the backup systems." "The backup systems are also damaged," Ryan replied. "Commander, without communications, we can't coordinate with Earth. We can't get supplies or reinforcements. The entire mission depends on reestablishing contact." Jake knew Ryan was right. The mission was bigger than any one person, even if that person was his friend. "Are you sure about this, Lieutenant Colonel?" Ryan was already putting on his spacesuit. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Commander. This is why we came here. To prove that humans can survive anywhere, no matter what the universe throws at us." The spacewalk took 3 hours. Jake watched on the external cameras as Ryan worked methodically to replace the damaged transmitter. The view was surreal, a tiny human figure working in the yellow clouds of Venus, with nothing but poisonous gas and deadly heat below. Finally, Ryan's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, I'm reading full power to the communication array. Try contacting Earth." Jake's hands shook as he activated the communication system. For a moment, there was only static. Then, miraculously, a voice came through loud and clear. "New Horizons, this is Earth Command. We've been trying to reach you for hours. What's your status?" Jake smiled as he responded. "Earth Command, this is New Horizons. We are operational and on station. Cloud Base Alpha is deployed and functioning. We have successfully established the first permanent human presence in Venus's atmosphere." There was a pause, then cheers could be heard from Earth Command. "Outstanding work, New Horizons. You've just made history." As Ryan returned safely to the ship, Jake looked out at Cloud Base Alpha floating peacefully in the clouds below. They had done it. Against all odds, they had brought humanity to Venus. 6 months had passed since Cloud Base Alpha first floated in the thick atmosphere of Venus. What started as a small research station with 5 people had grown into a busy outpost housing 25 men and women from Earth. Commander Jake Sullivan walked through the narrow corridors of the base, checking on the daily operations that kept them all alive 50 kilometers above one of the most dangerous planets in the solar system. The base hummed with activity. In the laboratory section, Dr. Amy Foster worked on improving their atmospheric processors. In the workshop, technicians repaired equipment damaged by the constant exposure to acid clouds. In the communication center, operators maintained contact with Earth and coordinated the arrival of new supplies and personnel. Jake stopped at the main observation deck, where a large window looked out into the swirling yellow clouds of Venus. The view still amazed him. During the day, the clouds glowed with golden light from the sun. At night, they flickered with lightning that lit up the sky like a constant fireworks display. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Commander Sullivan," called a voice behind him. Jake turned to see Katie Reynolds, the engineer who had arrived with the second wave of colonists. She was carrying a tablet filled with construction plans and wore the determined expression that had made her famous for solving impossible problems. "Katie, how are the manufacturing tests going?" Jake asked. Katie had brought with her the most advanced equipment ever sent to another planet. Her machines could take the raw materials from Venus's atmosphere and turn them into building supplies. If her experiments worked, they would never need to import construction materials from Earth again. Better than we hoped, Commander," Katie replied, showing him the data on her tablet. "We can now produce steel that's stronger than anything we make on Earth. The sulfur compounds in the atmosphere actually make the metal more resistant to corrosion. And Dr. Turner's biological processors are working perfectly with the new setup." "Doctor?" Sam Turner looked up from his workstation nearby. Over the past months, he had become the unofficial expert on adapting Earth life to Venus's harsh environment. His modified bacteria could now break down the poisonous gases in the atmosphere and turn them into useful chemicals. "The bacteria are thriving," Sam said with excitement. "They're reproducing faster than we expected and producing more oxygen than we need. We're actually going to have surplus breathable air within the next month." Jake felt a surge of pride. These people had volunteered to risk their lives on an untested mission, and they were succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. But he also knew that their biggest challenge was still ahead of them. "That's excellent news," Jake said, "because we're going to need all the resources we can get. Earth Command has approved the construction of New Olympus, our first permanent city platform. We start building in 3 weeks." Katie's eyes lit up with excitement. "Commander, I've been working on the designs with the engineering team on Earth. We think we can build something that's never existed before. A city that can adapt to its environment." She activated a holographic display that showed a complex structure floating in the clouds. It looked like a collection of connected platforms, each one capable of moving independently while staying linked to the others. "The key is flexibility," Katie explained. "Venus's atmosphere is much more dynamic than Earth's. We get windstorms that would destroy any rigid structure. But if we build the city in sections that can move with the wind, we can survive anything the planet throws at us." Jake studied the design carefully. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. But then again, everything they had accomplished so far had seemed impossible at first. "What about the storms?" Jake asked. "We've been lucky so far, but the weather reports from Earth show some massive storm systems heading our way." Dr. Ben Clark, the team's meteorologist, joined the conversation. He had been studying Venus's weather patterns for months and had discovered that the planet's atmospheric behavior was far more complex than anyone had realized. "Commander, we have a problem," Ben said, his voice serious. "There's a storm system approaching that's unlike anything we've seen before. The winds are reaching speeds of over 200 kilometers per hour, and it's carrying concentrated sulfuric acid. If it hits us directly, Cloud Base Alpha won't survive." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that their lives depended on the small base they had built. If it was destroyed, they would have no shelter from Venus's hostile environment. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. 72 hours, maybe less," Ben replied. "The storm is moving faster than our computer models predicted." Jake felt the weight of command pressing down on him. 25 people were depending on him to make the right decision. He could order an evacuation, but their transport ships were still a week away. He could try to reinforce the base, but there wasn't enough time to make significant improvements. "Katie, can we implement your flexible design idea on Cloud Base Alpha?" Jake asked. Katie looked at the holographic display, then at the current structure of their base. "Commander, it would require completely rebuilding the connection points between modules. We'd have to work around the clock, and there's no guarantee it would work. What's the alternative?" Jake asked. "We could try to move the entire base," Sam suggested. "The atmospheric currents are predictable enough. If we can adjust our buoyancy controls, we might be able to ride the storm instead of fighting it." Ben shook his head. "That's even more dangerous. If we miscalculate, we could end up being carried down toward the surface. At 40 kilometers altitude, the temperature would kill us in minutes." Jake looked at each member of his team. They were All brilliant, dedicated people who had given up comfortable lives on Earth to be here. He couldn't let them down. We're going to do both, Jake decided. Katie, you and your team start modifying the base structure. Sam, you work with Ben to calculate the atmospheric currents. We're going to turn Cloudbase Alpha into a storm-riding platform. The next 72 hours were the most intense of their lives. The entire crew worked without rest, modifying their home while preparing for the approaching storm. Katie's team rebuilt the connection points between modules, installing flexible joints that would allow the base to bend without breaking. Sam and Ben worked on the atmospheric control systems, fine-tuning the buoyancy controls that would let them ride the storm currents. As the storm approached, Jake stood on the observation deck, watching the wall of dark clouds rolling toward them. The air outside was already becoming turbulent, and he could feel the base beginning to shake. All stations report ready, Katie announced over the intercom. The flexible joints are installed and tested. We're as ready as we can be. Atmospheric controls are online, Sam reported. We can adjust our altitude by 10 kilometers in either direction. Jake activated the base-wide communication system. This is Commander Sullivan. In a few minutes, we're going to experience something that no human has ever faced before. But I have complete confidence in this team and in the systems we've built. We're going to ride this storm and come out stronger on the other side. The storm hit with incredible force. Jake felt the base lurching and swaying as winds of over 200 kilometers per hour battered their structure. Through the observation window, he could see nothing but swirling clouds and flashes of lightning. Hull integrity holding, Katie reported, her voice strained but steady. The flexible joints are working? We're bending but not breaking. Altitude stable, Sam called out. We're riding the current just like we planned. For 6 hours, the storm raged around them. The base twisted and flexed like a living thing, adapting to the changing wind patterns. Jake watched his crew work with calm efficiency, making constant adjustments to keep them safe. Finally, the storm began to weaken. The wind slowed and the violent shaking gradually stopped. Jake looked out the window and saw clear skies for the first time in hours. Damage report, Jake requested. Minor structural damage to the outer hull, Katie reported. Nothing that can't be repaired. All major systems are functioning normally. Atmospheric processors are working perfectly, Sam added. We actually collected enough sulfur compounds during the storm to last us for months. Jake smiled. They had not only survived Venus's worst weather, but they had learned how to thrive in it. The storm had tested their new flexible design, and it had passed with flying colors. Excellent work, everyone, Jake announced. We've just proven that humans can build structures that adapt to any environment. This is the breakthrough we needed for New Olympus. As the crew celebrated their victory, Jake looked out at the calm clouds surrounding them. Soon, those clouds would be home to humanity's first floating city, a place where thousands of people could live and work among the stars. The foundation for that dream had been laid not with steel and concrete, but with human determination and ingenuity. 2 years had passed since the first humans arrived in Venus's clouds, and New Olympus had become something that nobody on Earth had ever imagined. Mayor Susan Blake stood in her office at the top of the city's central tower, looking out at the sprawling metropolis that floated peacefully in the golden atmosphere 50 kilometers above Venus's surface. The city stretched for kilometers in every direction, a network of connected platforms and towers that rose and fell with the atmospheric currents. Over 10,000 people now called New Olympus home, and more arrived every week on transport ships from Earth and Mars. What had started as a small research station had grown into humanity's first true sky city. Susan had been elected mayor 6 months ago, after serving as the city's chief habitat designer for the past year. The job was unlike anything that had existed before. How do you govern a city that floats in the clouds? How do you make laws for people who live in the sky? Every day brought new challenges that required creative solutions. Mayor Blake called her assistant, Danny Rogers, as he entered the office carrying a stack of reports. The morning briefings are ready. The industrial district is reporting record production levels, and the residential sections are requesting expansion permits for 3 new neighborhoods. Susan smiled as she took the reports. The city's growth had been incredible. The industrial district now produced more advanced materials than some entire planets. The residential areas were home to families from dozens of different Earth nations, all working together to build a new kind of human civilization. What about the energy situation? Susan asked. Power had always been a concern for the floating city. Solar panels worked well during the day, but Venus's thick clouds made it difficult to gather enough energy for a city of 10,000 people. That's the exciting news, Danny replied. Dr. Carl Johnson says his lightning capture project is ready for testing. He thinks we can harvest enough energy from Venus's storms to power the entire city. Susan had heard about Dr. Johnson's work. He was a physicist who had arrived from Earth 8 months ago with a radical idea. Venus's atmosphere was filled with powerful electrical storms that generated more energy than humanity had ever seen. If they could capture that energy safely, New Olympus would never need to worry about power again. Schedule a meeting with Dr. Johnson for this afternoon, Susan said. If his system works, it could change everything. The meeting took place in the city's main laboratory, a vast space filled with equipment that would have been impossible to transport from Earth. Instead, everything had been built using materials harvested from Venus's atmosphere. The laboratory was proof of how far they had come in just 2 years. Dr. Carl Johnson was a thin man with wild hair and intense eyes. He stood next to a complex machine that looked like a giant metal tree with branches reaching toward the sky. The device was connected to the city's power grid through thick cables that ran along the laboratory ceiling. Mayor Blake, Carl said excitedly, this is going to revolutionize how we live on Venus. My lightning capture array can safely collect electrical energy from the storms that pass through our atmosphere. We've tested it on smaller storms, and the results are incredible. He showed Susan a computer screen displaying energy readings from the past week. The numbers were staggering. A single lightning strike contained enough energy to power a small town for days. Venus's atmosphere produced hundreds of lightning strikes every hour. The beauty of this system, Carl continued, is that it works with the natural electrical patterns of Venus's atmosphere. We're not fighting the environment, we're working with it. The storms that used to threaten our city can now provide all the power we need. Susan was impressed but cautious. What about safety? We can't risk the lives of our citizens for unlimited power. The system is completely automated, Carl explained. When a storm approaches, the array extends its collection branches into the charged atmosphere. The lightning is drawn to the array instead of the city. All the energy is safely converted and stored in our power grid. Susan made her decision. Dr. Johnson, you have permission to proceed with the full-scale test. But I want safety protocols in place and emergency backup systems ready. The test took place 3 days later during a massive electrical storm. Susan watched from the city's command center as Carl's lightning capture array extended its metal branches into the swirling clouds. The storm was one of the largest they had seen, with lightning flashing constantly through the atmosphere. Array is in position, Carl reported over the communication system. Beginning energy collection in 3, 2, 1. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Lightning bolts struck the array again and again, each one lighting up the sky with brilliant blue and white light. The energy readings on the command center screens climbed rapidly as the system converted the electrical energy into usable power. Incredible, whispered Jake Sullivan, who had been promoted to the city's defense coordinator. We're collecting more energy in 1 hour than our solar panels produce in a month. The test was a complete success. The lightning capture array worked perfectly, providing clean, unlimited energy for the growing city. Within weeks, similar arrays were installed throughout New Olympus, making the city completely energy independent. News of the breakthrough spread quickly throughout the solar system. Earth's governments, which had been skeptical of the Venus project, suddenly became very interested. Other nations began planning their own floating cities, hoping to duplicate New Olympus's success, but the attention also brought unwanted pressure. 3 months after the lightning capture system went online, Susan received an urgent message from Earth Command. The message was short and direct. New Olympus must share all technological advances with Earth immediately. This is not a request. Susan called an emergency meeting of the city council. The 5 elected representatives gathered in the council chamber, a circular room at the heart of the city's government district. The chamber's large windows looked out at the bustling neighborhoods where their citizens lived and worked. Earth Command is demanding that we give them our technology, Susan announced. They want the lightning capture systems, the flexible architecture designs, and the atmospheric processing techniques. They're offering nothing in return. Council member Alex Murphy, a former Mars colony administrator, shook his head in disgust. We risked our lives to develop these technologies. We faced storms that could have killed us all. Why should Earth get the benefits without sharing the risks? Because they funded the original mission, replied Council member Lisa Park, who had been one of the first colonists. We wouldn't be here without Earth support. Earth's support ended when they declared the mission too dangerous, countered Council member Robert Chun. We've been completely self-sufficient for over a year. We don't owe them anything. The debate continued for hours. Some council members believed they should cooperate with Earth to maintain good relations. Others felt that New Olympus had earned the right to control its own destiny. The city had become something unique in human history, a completely independent human settlement that owed nothing to any Earth government. Finally, Susan called for a vote. All in favor of declaring New Olympus an independent city-state? The vote was unanimous. New Olympus would govern itself, make its own laws, and control its own technology. The declaration was transmitted to Earth that same day, along with a message explaining their decision. The citizens of New Olympus have created something entirely new, the message read. We are no longer bound by the limitations of planetary thinking. We are the first truly free human settlement in space, and we invite all of humanity to join us in the clouds. The reaction from Earth was swift and angry. Politicians condemned the declaration as illegal. Military leaders spoke of sending ships to force New Olympus back under Earth control. But the citizens of the floating city were not afraid. They had survived Venus's worst storms. They had built a city that could adapt to any environment. They had proven that humans could thrive anywhere in the universe. Now they were ready to prove that humans could also govern themselves in space. As Susan stood in her office that evening, watching the lights of New Olympus twinkle in the golden clouds, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had built more than just a city. They had built a new kind of human civilization, one that belonged not to any single planet or nation, but to the stars themselves. The future was uncertain, but Susan was confident that the people of New Olympus would face whatever challenges came their way. They had learned to live in the sky, and now they were ready to teach the rest of humanity how to do the same. The warning came at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Admiral Tony Mitchell's fleet had arrived at Venus with orders to bring New Olympus back under Earth's control by any means necessary. Mayor Susan Blake stood in the city's command center, watching. The display screens showed 12 military ships taking positions around Venus. They mean business this time, said Commander Jake Sullivan, who was now in charge of the city's defense systems. Those are not transport ships. They're bringing enough firepower to destroy us completely. Susan felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. 10,000 people lived in New Olympus, including hundreds of children who had been born in the floating city. These people depended on her to keep them safe, but how could a peaceful city defend itself against Earth's military? Options, Susan said, using the same tone that Jake had once used during the early days of the mission. We could surrender, suggested Dr. Amy Foster, who was now the city's chief scientist, accept Earth's demands and hope they treat us fairly. No, said Dr. Carl Johnson firmly. We didn't build this city to give it away to politicians who never risked their lives for it. There has to be another way. Jake was studying the tactical displays, his mind working through possibilities. Susan, remember how we survived that first big storm? We didn't fight it. We learned to work with Venus's atmosphere. Maybe we can? Do the same thing now? What do you mean? Susan asked. Jake pointed to the atmospheric readings on his screen. Venus's cloud layers are thick and complex. Our city was designed to move through them. What if we could make New Olympus disappear? Doctor. Foster understood immediately. The lower cloud layers are so dense that sensors can't penetrate them. If we could adjust our altitude and atmospheric density, we could become invisible to their detection systems. But that's dangerous, warned Dr. Ben Clark, the meteorologist. The lower layers have higher acid concentrations and more turbulent weather. We've never taken the city that deep into the atmosphere. Susan looked around the command center at the faces of her advisors. These were the same people who had risked everything to build a city in the clouds. They had faced every challenge Venus could throw at them and survived. Now they faced their greatest test yet. How long would it take to prepare the city for deep atmospheric travel? Susan asked. 6 hours, Jake replied. We would need to seal all the external systems and boost the atmospheric processors to handle the increased acid levels. It would be uncomfortable, but we could do it. And our children? Susan asked. The schools, the hospitals, the residential areas? All designed with Venus's atmosphere in mind, Dr. Foster assured her. The city can handle it. The question is whether Admiral Mitchell will let us disappear before he attacks. Susan made her decision. Do it. Begin preparations immediately and send a message to Admiral Mitchell. Tell him I want to meet. 2 hours later, Susan found herself in a transport shuttle flying toward Admiral Mitchell's flagship. The journey through Venus's atmosphere was surreal. Below her, New Olympus stretched across the golden clouds like a jewel floating in the sky. Above her, the dark shapes of Earth's military ships waited like predators. Admiral Mitchell was a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes. He received Susan in his ship's conference room, surrounded by military officers who looked at her with barely concealed hostility. Mayor Blake, Mitchell said, his voice formal and unfriendly. You have exactly 10 minutes to explain why I shouldn't order my ships to destroy your illegal settlement. Susan had prepared for this moment. Admiral, New Olympus represents the future of human civilization. We have developed technologies that could help humanity colonize the entire solar system. Destroying us would be destroying the greatest advance in human space exploration since the invention of the rocket. You are criminals, Mitchell replied coldly. You stole Earth technology and resources to build your city? Now you refuse to share what you have learned. That makes you traitors. We are pioneers, Susan said firmly. Just like the people who first sailed across Earth's oceans or the first colonists who went to Mars. We took risks that Earth was unwilling to take, and we succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. She activated a holographic display showing New Olympus from above. The city was beautiful and complex, with residential districts connected to industrial areas by graceful bridges that swayed gently in the atmospheric currents. This city is home to 10,000 people from 30 different Earth nations, Susan continued. They came here not as representatives of their governments, but as human beings seeking a better future. We have created the first truly international human settlement in space. Mitchell studied the display but showed no emotion. Very impressive. Now it belongs to Earth. Admiral, Susan said, playing her final card, what if I told you that New Olympus could serve as a neutral ground for all of Earth's nations? A place where humans could work together without the old conflicts and rivalries that divide us on Earth? For the first time, Mitchell looked interested. Explain. Earth's nations are already planning their own Venus colonies, Susan said. But instead of competing with each other, they could work together. New Olympus could be the capital of a new kind of human civilization, one that belongs to all humanity, not just to Earth. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. Susan could see him thinking, weighing the political implications of her proposal. Finally, he spoke. Even if I agreed with you, my orders are clear. Earth Command wants control of your technology and your city. I am a soldier, not a politician, Susan nodded. She had expected this answer. Then I'm afraid we have nothing more to discuss, Admiral. She returned to New Olympus as the city completed its preparations for deep atmospheric travel. The streets were quieter than usual as citizens secured their homes and businesses for the dangerous journey ahead. In the schools, teachers explained to the children that they were going on an adventure to explore the deeper parts of Venus's atmosphere. All systems ready, Jake reported as Susan returned to the command center. The city is sealed and the atmospheric processors are running at maximum capacity. We can descend to 35 kilometers altitude and maintain life support for up to a week. Susan looked out at Admiral Mitchell's ships one last time. Begin descent. New Olympus slowly sank into the thick yellow clouds of Venus's lower atmosphere. The city's flexible architecture adapted to the changing pressure and density, bending and swaying like a living thing. On the external cameras, Susan watched as the military ships above them grew smaller and finally disappeared completely. Sensors show no sign of our position, reported Dr. Foster. As far as their instruments are concerned, New Olympus has vanished. For 3 days, the city remained hidden in the deep atmosphere. The acid levels were higher than anything they had experienced before, and the atmospheric processors worked constantly to maintain breathable air. But the city's inhabitants remained calm and confident. They had learned to trust in their technology and in each other. On the 4th day, an unexpected message arrived from Earth. It was not from Admiral Mitchell or Earth Command, but from Dr. Helen Martinez, the woman who had first proposed building a city on Venus. Citizens of New Olympus, the message began. I am proud beyond words of what you have accomplished. You have proven that human beings can adapt to any environment and build a civilization anywhere in the universe. But more than that, you have shown that humans can govern themselves with wisdom and courage. The message continued with news that changed everything. Earth's nations have been meeting to discuss your proposal for a neutral space territory. After much debate, they have agreed to recognize New Olympus as humanity's first independent space nation. Admiral Mitchell has been ordered to withdraw his fleet. The city erupted in celebration as the news spread. People poured into the streets, laughing and crying with relief and joy. Children who had been born in the clouds looked up at their parents with wonder. Not fully understanding what had happened, but knowing that something important had occurred, Susan stood in the central plaza, surrounded by thousands of her fellow citizens. These people had trusted her to lead them through the most dangerous period in their city's history, and together they had emerged victorious. Today, Susan announced to the cheering crowd, we are no longer refugees from Earth or pioneers in exile. We are citizens of New Olympus, the first free nation in space. But our work is not finished. We are going to expand throughout Venus's atmosphere, building new cities and new homes for anyone who dreams of living among the stars. As the celebration continued around her, Susan looked up through the transparent dome above the plaza. The thick clouds of Venus swirled in endless patterns, but beyond them lay the black of space and the distant lights of other worlds. Dr. Foster approached her with a new report. Susan, the Jupiter mission is ready to launch. We have enough resources and technology to send the first expedition to the outer planets. Susan smiled. New Olympus had become more than just a city in the clouds. It had become the launching point for humanity's greatest adventure. From their floating home in Venus's atmosphere, humans would spread throughout the solar system, carrying with them the lessons they had learned about adaptation, cooperation, and the unlimited potential of human imagination.